an opportunity for you and your community to come together to create food security, to create opportunity, to learn about the environment and have a bit of education around where our food comes from. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead. I'm a permaculture design consultant and a member of the Virginia Master Naturalists. And I've come to here today. We're going to go through the guidelines from the Virginia Cooperative Extension, and there's also guidelines from the North Carolina state extension offices on how to start a community garden. In this conversation, we're going to talk about some of the challenges, the mistakes, the frustrations, the things that happen when we're trying to do a community garden, as well as how to overcome these things so that you, even if you don't have space in your own backyard, even if you don't have any gardening skills, can start learning these things again to have organic, healthful food from the ground, from the land, to participate in a friendly way. In many community gardens, they're designed to be more accessible than you might have at your home. In many cases, community gardens have access to tools and equipment. Plus, I'm going to introduce you to some of the nonprofit and other resources available in the area. This is not about getting a grant for your community garden because I can show you today that you can start your community garden at a church, at a civil building, as something that you do as part of a neighborhood block. You don't need someone to grant you permission or to otherwise give you money to start a community garden. You can start where you're at with the skill sets you have. My excitement about it is that as you get involved in a community garden, you might discover things about pollinating plants, discover the difference between F1 varieties and open pollination varieties or heritage breed varieties. These are different categories of plants that may or may not give you the economic value of being able to collect the seeds. You're going to learn a little bit about community gardens versus the victory garden style or a backyard garden. And we're going to do it within the context of tools that you can get. So there's nothing to buy. I'm not trying to sell you anything other than on the idea of how exciting it might be to get together with friends, neighbors, family, your church, your civic organization, to take a disused or unused piece of land and transform it into food, community, and enjoyment. Now it's spring right now, so it's March 3rd. It's not quite spring. March 20th is where things kick off, but everybody you know who's gardening is scrambling around right now, getting seed orders in, getting plants figured out, everything that is necessary. In fact, if you comment on this particular program that we're going through right now, I will be sure to start linking in some of those resources so that you can find, for example, there's a local nonprofit that's doing a class on gardening. You may have heard things about compost, soil biology. You might have learned things about permaculture or regenerative agriculture or organic gardening. What are the differences and how do they apply? It turns out you don't need to know any of that stuff to get started today with plants and the knowledge you have. So let's get into that. Let's start talking about and I'm playing with my little magic software here to see if we can't get you a better picture of the screen. There we go. Um, the Virginia Cooperative Extension, your tax dollars has already paid for resources that can to get you the basic framework of gardening. I'm not affiliated with these folks other than the programs that I'm involved in, and through my own educative process. And there isn't a right or a wrong way to start a community garden because if you don't have the community garden, you don't have the benefits. And when we speak about benefits of a community garden, uh, let me just show you some pictures first. A lot of people like the pictures. All right. So let me just move around the screen a little bit. This is an informal presentation there on LinkedIn. We're there on YouTube. Actually, I tried to do Facebook, it wouldn't work there. But again, if this is something you're interested in, you want to share the link to today's presentation because we're going to get you started from where you're at. We're going to talk about some of the mistakes to avoid. And then I'm going to share with you a couple resources that'll get you started pretty quick. But you see happy young children, you see happy adults, you see beautiful food, you see the results of uh, gardening activities. And I'm looking in the other window here to see if we're on LinkedIn. Let's just see if we're on LinkedIn. Hello, LinkedIn. All right, won't let me post to some channels. Hello, YouTube. My spelling is atrocious. All right, that's the challenges with doing live messaging. Uh, but my point is, and are we okay? We are recording and saving to the cloud. Let me see if we're recording. All right, we are broadcasting live while you guys are enjoying those pictures. Let me just do the little logistics here. All right, I confirmed it's there. We're full bore now. Let's talk about a community garden. So a lot of folks, when they think community garden, they have a certain aesthetic that they're looking for in the garden. They either have a certain aesthetic or methodology. Now, when I lived out in Norfolk, Virginia, um, William and Mary College had community gardens, as well as ODU had Old Dominion University had community gardens. Those community gardens were as unique as the communities that participated in them. Some gardens were more flowers, some gardens were more vegetables, some gardens were more raised beds versus in the ground. Now, when we're determining whether we're going to have raised beds or we're going to be in the ground, there are factors such as the quality of soil. In the case where you're using land that may have been degraded, you do want to have raised beds. Raised beds get your soil, allows you to bring in either new soil or to work with soil that's more curated than just in the ground. However, there are places such as local farms or land that has been verified to be clean, and you can plant right into the soil. Now, what do I mean by clean? And again, we're going to use this Virginia Cooperative Education Extension uh, Gardner's Guidelines. And what do we mean by being clean? It is the fact that we have soil that has not been contaminated. If the soil has been contaminated, such as people used to park their cars there, or it's a disused parking lot, or there was a chemical spill. So maybe the land that's available to you was a gray site, or otherwise had problems with environmental damage. You do not want to use those areas. And if you have to use those areas because you have no better option, then you want to use some kind of raised beds with some kind of barrier underneath. So I'm saying you can start a garden without buying anything, but I'm also saying that we don't want to go so cheap that we are in a dangerous environment, or we're putting a community garden in a disused, old, burned out building space. Because there can be, where people have burned, and we've talked about this in other videos, there can be PCBs and other chemicals in the soil that are forever chemicals. And we don't want, again, because the objective is quality food, we don't want a situation where we're growing in soiled ground. Now, what's the difference between dirt, soil, and compost? Well, dirt is just the generic term. It has very little nutritional value. And again, I'm not going to go through all 537 pages. I'm just, and I'll share this link to with you in the comments, or in follow up. But I'm just saying there are free resources available. And if you've got a dirt lot, that's not going to have the nutrients necessary. You'll be fighting an uphill battle. And so you will want to have raised beds. If you have soil, soil tends to be biologically active. It tends to be a darker color. And so that soil, being biologically active, is going to have a better chance of growing in it. Now, again, if you want to learn about botany, soil nutrition management, we can dive into those details in future webinars. But right now, if you're looking at an empty lot, whether it's in your backyard that you're going to invite your neighbors over to share, if you're going to do this outside the church, I remember a church in Greensboro, they put together a community garden, and they put the community garden next to the playground area, because the playground area would allow the adults, especially the older adults, who would like to go over there and work in the garden after church service, but they wanted to be able to see the kids. And then it was out of the way, so when the kids went out to the soccer field, they didn't tromp through the garden. Now, me personally would have turned the entire soccer field into a garden area, or maybe we border the soccer field with a garden area. But their mindfulness was, is this a place where children are going to slow down and be more mindful and not trample on the plants? Is it far enough away from the parking lot so that we're not getting water off the parking lot into our garden area where we're potentially going to grow food? And then is the soil suitable for for planting. So if you have just dirt, it's going to be more likely in Virginia, it's going to be like a Virginia clay. It's going to be sandy. Maybe it has some rocks in it. That may not be suitable because it won't have proper drainage. We can add soil to that to make it better. Um, but soil itself, where maybe you've excavated the grass and turned the grass over. I know, God forbid, I get rid of some lawn, but think about it. If we convert a lot of the lawn into a garden, we can end up with mulch paths. Again, let's look at those pretty pictures. We could end up with mulch paths, and this is actually a really good example right here, because if you look at this picture, you can see not only smiling kids in a community garden that are engaging, they're slowing down, they're getting to learn where their food comes from. But notice on the ground, that's actually wood chips, and the grade of the wood chip tells me that that is from a tree services company, and so it's not chemically treated. It's wood chips. And then these boards that are around these raised beds are simply 2x4. Was that the looks like a 1x6 with a little corner post in the corner. And so it's really low inputs. And the mulch gives us an opportunity to not be tromping around in the mud. You don't want to be using rocks or anything like that, but we do want to cover the soil because it is if it is just dirt, adding the wood chips will add nutrients, they'll add fiber, they'll add biomass that gives a place for the living soil to be. But if it is actually soil already, the wood chips will protect that soil and actually keep down the amount of grass and weeds. Now, you'll notice in the garden bed itself, there's some kind of medium in the garden beds. Now, you can use straight compost, but a lot of times when we're converting an area that has a lot of grass, we'll cut the sod, cut the grass, and then we'll turn that grass over, and then we'll layer on top of that straw, compost, soil, different factors like that. Now, we don't want to put clay and stuff on top of it because the clay, again, doesn't drain very well. In order for plants to be successful, they need to be in a successful environment. Just like the children of your community, the elderly in the community, the neighbors in the community, a community garden is part of that successful environment. And why is that? Because nobody would argue a garden is not beautiful. Now, a garden could be overgrown and someone could think it is not beautiful, or the garden is changing seasons, but that's a factor of education. That's why I want to show you that both the Virginia Extension Office and the North Carolina Extension offices have beautiful resources. You don't need to buy a book. You don't need to go take a class. There's plenty of resources available online if you're willing to sit down. But in this case, they have these 1x6s. So plants really just grow in the top 6 inches of soil, and they fill the beds with something. We want to fill the beds with living soil. Again, food security is a big issue. Most of Martinsville, Henry County is in a food desert. Okay. And that means that you can't get high quality, nutritious food easily. And so, what I'm envisioning is that 100 community gardens placed across the area would be close enough to each family, each church, each community, each civic center. And by the way, there are beautiful examples all across the region. Not as many as I like, but there are all across the region where you could walk to the garden and work in this environment. Now, the benefit of a community garden is that someone is going to help build these things. Because if you built this in your backyard, it would be pretty difficult. Also, some of the challenges of backyard gardens is that you have deer and pests, where in the situation where it's a community garden, not only are you getting the education that you need, but very often you can build a frame around it. So there's a place called the Sustainable Homestead Institute where I've done a number of videos about their market garden, and they have an 8-foot wire fence all the way around their 2-acre garden, and that reduces the amount of pests that come into the garden. They still going to have rabbits from time to time. A deer is still going to get in, but we're not taking a scarcity mindset. We're taking the abundance mindset of just growing a little bit extra. So a community garden, we're not really worried about somebody picking our tomatoes or something like that. We are working together as a group. If they're picking your tomatoes, they have a reason for it. But we can also have that conversation and show them how to grow their own tomatoes. However, if the soil foundation is not there, then you're going to be fighting against the current. And so what they fill these beds with is some kind of compost and soil mixture. You can fill it with straw. You can actually grow in straw bales. And then you'll see on the top there, and if I can zoom, maybe I can zoom in. The top of this particular bed again has a mulch. The only thing is this is a very fine mulch, and this particular mulch, of course, is untreated. We're not using any chemicals. We're not using any herbicides, pesticides. We're not using any GMO seed if possible because we want to save the seeds. And GMO seeds have a licensing requirement. And so you can't just save the seed. We also don't want any F1 varieties. We want to use heirloom or what is known as true to seed so that we can save seeds because the community garden isn't about spending more money every year. It's about building a community and investing into the community. So you see in these very simple beds. Now, if we're looking at a garden like this, and this particular garden is with a botanical center, you'll see the paths. Now, they botanical centers love to put that pea gravel down for the walking path, and that's likely because when you have a large amount of traffic, like in a community center environment, that you will get compaction. And we really didn't talk about compaction, but compaction is where you end up with more dirt than soil, and then you don't have the water permeating, and then it costs a lot to put materials in. I prefer the wood chips because we're supporting biological activity, mushrooms, earthworms, different things like that. But in this environment, they actually have a very low border and a variety of borders, and their walking paths are permanent. And you can probably see in the middle of this picture, there's water. So the basic things you're going to need on site for your community garden is going to be space, some kind of framework for gardening because you're going to have plots for individual families or individuals, and then some kind of access, and then finally compost. So let's talk about the compost because every one of these beds eventually either makes compost or uses compost. And again, there's all kinds of ways you can do this. These are very high raised beds. That's called a keyhole garden, which was popularized in Africa, and it's drought tolerant. um, all kinds of opportunities. But again, you don't need to build anything. See, that's pretty nice. That's fancy. You don't need to really build anything fancy. It all starts with, again, having a space. In that space, what are we going to have in that space? We're going to have some kind of designation for where to plant and then where to move what might be considered waste. So I'm going to go ahead in this particular report. So this is we just talked a little bit about soil. It gave you a high level. Um, the benefit of insects. So one of the reasons we're not spraying is because the things that we consider to be pests, those little bugs and stuff, they're actually food for birds. And so if we're spraying them and killing them, now the birds eat them and now the birds get sick. So we also know that some of the diseases in the plant is not the plant itself, it's actually their interaction with soil. All right, stress. See, there's a lot of detail in here. Plant damage. Now, a lot of times when we do have plant damage or a plant dries out or dies, we clip that plant off and we throw it into a compost pile, which is perfectly fine. We're going to talk about that in a second. The vegetable garden attributes, canning. So this particular resource has, let me just get compost. It says nothing. Oh, there it goes. It says quite a bit about compost. So let's get back into the compost. All right. So what can we use in the garden beds themselves? Well, we can use straw, which is a woody biomass. We can use manure, which needs to be treated some way in order to not introduce pests and harmful elements. We can use grass clippings, leaves. We can use food scraps. There's so many different things. But the transformative quality to take it from just materials into an integrated compost. And again, compost is describing material that has been broken down through at least 3 heat cycles. And those heat cycles increase and here's the fancy word here, the cation exchange capacity. That's the amount of carbon available for nutrients to be encapsulated in so that those nutrients are soluble to the plants. So there have been many studies over the years that show a healthy plant is a result of good nutrition, some kind of stimulants. So wind moving the plant a little bit improves the fibers, sunlight appropriate for the type of plant, and then water appropriate for the plant. So just like building a community includes people who care about each other, people who work together, people who have good health and a reasonable amount of security, plants have a similar model. And in that, feeding them compost works very well because it allows you to take the waste material from the garden. And again, I want to keep this at a very high level. So your grass clippings, your leaves have to come from an environment that hasn't been sprayed with chemicals. Many times it's better just to leave the leaves under the tree as a mulch than it is to move the leaves because a lot of times they contain small organisms and creatures that are nesting there, which again are food for the birds. So we're looking at this more of a holistic approach. But let's assume we've picked up bagged leaves from people who don't really care about the birds, and we mound those up along with green grass, along with other nitrogen sources such as food waste, organic food waste, and we turn that pile together, combining in oxygen. There's going to be a microbial reaction. The microbes are going to eat the nitrogen, they're going to eat the carbon, and in that combination, it's going to produce a soil that is um, basically a high organic material. So layering wood chips over your paths introduces a high organic material that uh, that chokes out weeds. Again, nobody wants to have a community garden that they've constantly got to weed, they constantly got to mow the grass. I like the community gardens where we're planting and harvesting as the primary function of the garden. So again, one of the reasons why people don't want community gardens is because they feel like it's a lot of work and that the garden will get neglected and become overgrown. Now, one of my hobbies is traveling across Virginia and North Carolina and filming community gardens. Now, not all community gardens allow me to film, so sometimes I just have conversation with the people working there. But what I find is the most successful community gardens don't have a bunch of plastic. They don't take a bunch of shortcuts. They don't allow you to spray or put herbicides out. They focus primarily on biological health, the health of the soil, the health of the fungi or symbiotic relationships associated with breaking down organic material. They focus on giving the beds a rest. So for example, if they have 12 raised beds, not all 12 raised beds will be in production every year. They'll actually have a rotation. They'll have limited competition, meaning you're not going to be in the same garden bed every year. But because of that, the guidelines, which is no herbicides, no pesticides, we have an equivalent value in those garden beds. And so everybody's doing some kind of education to understand the composting process. So there's probably a central composting area rather than having multiple composting areas. And then all the outside materials comes through the composting area because composting gives us an opportunity to get that pile heated up, which will kill off grass seeds and other types of waste. So this central compost pile could start out with a dump truck load of compost, but it could also start out with a few educational sessions about composting. And there's an educational session coming up where you'll get to see how composting works. And again, you want to put a note in the comments, and we'll get that to you. And we're talking about events in the Martinsville Henry County area. But there is compost available. There is broken down soil and materials. There's straw and hay bales. Hay bales are a little challenging because they contain a lot of seeds, but I do a lot of gardening in hay waste. So the goats have manured it, or I'm cleaning out a shelter. But the point being, though, is we don't have to wait for the perfect soil. We can use biological methods to mix things together. When I was in the city of Martinsville, I was producing 8 cubic yards of compost every year. And I was doing this with coffee grounds I collected, yard waste from my neighbors. None of my neighbors spray their yard with anything, so I'd pick up yard waste, grass and biological materials, biomass I grew on the property, and then ultimately how I manage those beds. Now, I have a lot of YouTube videos and things that we can show you when it comes to specific instruction, but just understand that if you've got a place and you've got some kind of border to define the areas in which you're growing, whether that's your access paths or your raised beds, or even just, four logs on the ground designating a space, you can start a community garden. Now, the compost itself should never smell. That's a big concern. That's a big frustration people have. They say if you have compost pile, because that was the complaint the city had. somebody from the city showed up and said that my compost piles smell and that they were inappropriate. Now, I do know prominent city folks that that had massive compost piles that they had to turn over with a bobcat. These were turned over by the neighboring kid, which I paid to turn the piles over. But long story short, they never smell. They shouldn't smell. And many of my other neighbors had compost piles that didn't smell either, because the compost that smells is a result of either it's too active or it doesn't have the right balance of carbon. So it has too much nitrogen, too much food waste. So anytime your compost pile smells, you want to add additional carbonous material, which could be dried leaves, straw, fine wood chips or wood shavings. And then you want to turn the pile so that we've incorporated those materials, because we do want microbes that are aerobic, meaning they use oxygen, because those are the ones that don't smell. That smell is methane. That smell is ammonia. That smell is created by anaerobic bacteria, which of course will are in an environment where there's no oxygen. Now, why am I even telling you these things in a high level setting? It's because the concept of gardening is a metaphor for neighbors and community. It's also a metaphor for understanding the basic biology of life. There's a lot of things that people do right now that are harmful to the environment, that are harmful to what I call beneficial insects, insects that are food for birds, insects that are pollinating flowers and plants, that goes far beyond just bees, and then also the other elements in our ecosystem that are indicators of the health that it has and the health impact it has on us as individuals. So when you see a nature trail or you see a beautiful garden, it's the result of a balance in the system that produces those things that our brains see as desirable. And so rather than um, weeds, we understand what the plants are and we use them appropriate. So some things that we call weeds are actually edible plants, and other things are great mineral accumulators that can be thrown in the compost and through the process. So the Virginia Cooperative Extension Gardener's Handbook actually goes into deep detail. You can use alfalfa, you can use barley, wheat straw, wheat, clover. You can even grow on those idle beds or areas that you're going to expand the community garden to. You can even grow cover crops that will make what's called green manure. It'll make soil, it'll make plant biomass that you can then use as mulch, that you can then use as, uh, you know, to make compost. And a lot of folks think that making compost is difficult, but we have a number of systems for making compost that are quite easy. We're going to do permaculture, community garden. And the reason I say permaculture is because it represents permanent agriculture. It's my goal to see 100 community gardens in my region. And it could be your goal to see 100 community gardens in your region, but 100 community gardens that are permanent fixtures in the community, just like Virginia Tech had a garden for a while, and they have actually demonstration gardens out at their extension offices. Like I said, ODU had community garden. William and Mary had a community garden. As part of an educational opportunity, every school, and some schools in our area do have community gardens, but every school, every church, every civic center, at least give the Victory Garden a try. And you'll find documentation about the Victory Garden. But there's also a design element and an aesthetic element where we can have organic spaces that actually lower our cortisol, improve our behavior. Now, what do I mean by improve our behavior? Well, children who are working in a garden, they very often take pride in what they're doing and the excitement of seeing the plants grow. And so they're not running around being crazy. So it's a change in behavior. They can be crazy on the soccer field, but where the plants are, they're sitting with grandma having a conversation. And so we now have an intergenerational exchange and a community bonding that previously wasn't there. Another factor happens is when it comes harvest time, very often community gardens that are done well will have far more produce and materials than you would have otherwise. And that surplus of materials facilitates a community dinner. You can also have fun. This particular garden is a certain shape, and so you can demonstrate different types of growing techniques. But as you're having that conversation around it, when it comes harvest and you've got like 3 bushels of tomatoes, you may want to You learn canning techniques. You may want to share those tomatoes with each other. You may want to have a fresh salad. Again, do you see how community gardens bring us a lot of value beyond just the fact that we're growing vegetables? Now, I personally like these more organic looks, and I'm showing them to you right now because they didn't cost a lot of money to put together. The challenge about this organic look, though, in a community garden is it's hard to know where individual families might be gardening, and these are not cooperatives in the sense that we're growing a large volume of produce. If all you can do in a community garden is plant some marigolds, that has significant value. And so when I see community gardens that are public, they tend to be more of a square foot design. Okay. And so if you do get any book out there, you want to get the square foot gardening book. And the reason you want to get the square foot gardening book is because it is a more dimensionally understood space. So a lot of folks that I talk with about community gardens, they say, well, we don't have a lot of space for a community garden. Okay, fair enough. Don't have a lot of space for a community garden. They say, oh, well, we don't have enough seeds for a community garden. We don't have enough money. But if you look at the square foot gardening system, this is literally a 4 foot by 4 foot space. Now, the reason I introduced the square foot garden is because this could be in your backyard. This could be in your front yard. This could be in your side yard. It literally is 4 foot by 4 foot. And it starts teaching you some of the concepts about plant selection, plant spacing, and the core functions of the soil itself. Again, we're not filling these beds with dirt. We're cultivating biologically active soil. We're leaving the roots in the ground. We're not spending a lot of extra time and effort to make the garden because our focus is on planting the plant and harvesting the fruit. Now, there are techniques, natural farming, permaculture design, regenerative farming, organic gardening. Or again, I'd love to hear you get interested in that in the future. But right now, if you can find 4 pieces of wood and some grids, something to make a grid, you can start learning the basics using the book, The Square Foot Garden. And what's so valuable about the square foot garden is that you can start planning better. So because you do learn a lot of planning strategy, you start being more aware of the environment, but you can actually start laying out different layouts for different seasons, and then you can start graduating to larger gardens, larger beds. But the 4 foot by 4 foot, the 4 foot by 8 foot unit is very easy to sign people up on. So if you've established a community garden at your church, you don't need to have everybody in the church interested. You just need to have a space to do it and then maybe 3 to 5 beds to get started. And you can have one bed for the youth group, and you can have one bed for the children's group, and you can have individual beds for family members or adult family members. And now you start holding educational sessions. The pastor can talk about, or the reverend or the chaplain can start talking about analogies from the Bible that are related to casting seed. It becomes part of the communications in the community, but it doesn't take more. This is literally some 2x4s on the ground, and you can see that is string put across here. Now, I'd like to see you use a biodegradable string, and I would like to see the head of the string, not the little nails that they used here, not there, because you want people to be able to kneel down or sit on the edge of the garden bed. Now, should we use treated wood or should we use other wood or scrap wood or old pallets? I personally don't want to use any treated wood or salted wood in the garden itself. I would prefer to use uh, straight logs, rough cut lumber, or other materials that would biodegrade. Now, why is that? Well, it's very possible just to mound the beds up with and put mulch paths in between it. You don't really need the raised bed structure. But in a situation where you're just kind of really quick, very small budget, create some beds, you do need to hold the first 4 to 6 inches of soil in place. That way, when you're watering, it's not eroding or anything like that. Now, if you have accessibility concerns, and we talk about this when we do actual training, you may build a treated lumber bed that has a little bench on the side, and there's more of a raised bed that has um, okay, so here's an example of a raised bed that's actually on a tall platform. If you're going to go through the trouble to build something like this, of course, for people that aren't going to kneel down and things like that, the square foot garden works really well, but we can raise it up high enough to get that 4 to 6 inches of soil and people can start having the experience. By the way, if you've got a nursing home, a active living community, if you've got a environment where folks gather together that have mobility challenges, maybe they need the hard soil to get out to the space because the mulch would be difficult or the terrain is uncomfortable and you want to move it closer to the building. A raised bed garden like this is perfect. Square foot gardening is perfect. And you can get started right away. Really, I'm trying to eliminate all the excuses. But in a community setting, having multiple of these, it takes a little bit more money up front to build them, but you want to build it with materials that's going to last longer. So in this case, you might use redwood or cedar or a treated wood, but on the inside of it, we'll line it a little bit, not with plastic, not with landscaping fabric, but we'll line it a little bit with a wood that can break down so that when the biological activity is there, the biological activity is not eating into the treated wood. Because literally what's happening in soil is those microbes are consuming material in which they're making biologically available to the plants in exchange for sugars out of the plants. So I encourage you to learn the biology because it's going to reveal to you all kinds of very interesting things that are going to help you have more enjoyment out of gardening. But you can start with just the square foot garden. In fact, this is an example from the Square Foot Gardening website, which has lots of free information. Again, again, I have preferences. Like I don't want grass between paths because I don't want to have to clean that up. And then, of course, I don't want um, the rock or anything like that because I'd have to clean that up. But what I'm describing is there are ways to make a garden, Americans with Disabilities Act, uh, accessible. Because if you're a civic organization, if you're a government agency, if you're a school, there are requirements on you to comply with Americans with Disabilities, but you don't have to do it in such a way where you're having to spray and clean and do a lot of extra work. Again, that's why I showed you the square foot garden. In situations where it's a church or a community organization, we want the community garden to be as enjoyable as possible. We want it to be an environment where people are going to have a good time and they're going to enjoy that interaction. And so again, we don't want to have grass to mow or a bunch of auxiliary chores. If you have a monthly composting class, that's going to get an opportunity to turn to compost. You might have somebody who's more interested in compost who's going to do regular turnings. But we don't want to make it another job. And see, I think that's a big reason a lot of community gardens fail is they come in and they say, now this is a dry land community garden. Let me pull that picture up there. See, this is a dry land community garden, and that's that rock and that's the dirt that already exists. They're not hauling that in. But if you were to haul something in, you want to haul something in that's beneficial, that's going to add um, biomass. It's going to add carbon to the soil. It's going to be a medium that's suitable for fungi and microbes and soil nematites, totes, and all the fancy things that live in the soil. You don't need to know those things exist to benefit from them, but you do need to create an environment that's suitable for your plants. And so they have rocky soil. They added the raised bed. They filled the raised bed with some kind of medium, which you don't necessarily have to buy. And then from that medium, they're using you can start with a square foot gardening method. You can do row cropping. There's so many different things you can do. In fact, I built a garden for an older lady down in Greensboro where we used logs. She had gotten a bunch of wood chips from a tree services company and she'd gotten a bunch of logs. They're about 8 to 10 foot long. And I ended up making for her about 4 foot wide. And now the reason we're talking about 4 foot wide, 5 foot wide is because you want to be able to reach into the middle of the garden from both sides. But and it's called a double reach bed. I was able to help her get a double reach bed, and then I thought maybe she's going to get a rake or a hoe or anything like that, and kind of level out the top of the bed, and really she just took handfuls of seed and spread it on the garden. That's beautiful for wildflowers. That's beautiful for lettuces and things that grow about the same time. But it was literally like Ruth Strout's, lazy garden. It's no effort, no effort, but huge abundance. And it started by, again, being able to differentiate between the path and the bed so that we're not constantly walking on the bed and creating compaction, and ultimately establishing growing spaces and areas. Now, let's talk a little bit about the concerns. All right. So I was establishing a community garden in my neighbor. See, I've been able to build community gardens in all kinds of places, participate in community gardens, all types of places. But some cities don't have the mindset of growth. They don't have the mindset of opportunity, and they also don't understand what does nature really look like. Now, rather than digging deep into that, let's look at this picture right here. This is a garden. To me, it looks beautiful. Now, there are some things that can be done to improve maintenance. Now, I'm not talking about the type of maintenance that you guys are thinking of, cleaning up the garden and why are these beds all overgrown. I'm just thinking about ease of use, which would include, if you notice the paths themselves, they have grass up on the edge of that mound. So there's like a little mound here that's the frame for the raised bed. That little grass on the edge, I wouldn't want that grass to go to seed and get grass seeds in the bed. Now they look like they have a hard packed ground. Of course, that's what happens when you have grass or you have wood chips down. But I would layer wood chips here as a mulch to kill off all that grass. That way, it's a little nicer looking, but I'm not getting the possibility of seeds from the path into the garden itself. And so there's less opportunity for contamination. Now, at the end of season, I do see rosemary here and a couple other things. At the end of season, I would prune back anything that's into season, kind of like turns brown. I once had my wife at the time came out and said I had killed all the garden. I had wildflowers and they were beautiful while they were there, and it was now fall, and all the leaves fell off the trees, and the garden was pretty much dead looking. And she accused me of killing the garden. The truth of it is that plants go through seasons, and so to tidy up a little bit, you do want to take those old plants. And what do we do with the old plants? All right, we already mentioned that we put them in the compost pile. Now, do you need to chip them, to shred them, or anything? No, just put them in the compost pile, turn the pile periodically, let the microbes break everything down. But this garden could be accused of being untidy and unneat by some busybody that doesn't know what the hell's going on. And that's again because they don't see that there's a lot of, and this is why the education is so important. There's a lot of pollinator habitat here. Now, I do see on the edge they could, I guess my little face is covered. There you go. On the edge here where they have sidewalk, maybe that could be cleaned up a little bit, but it looks like they're using the fence as a trellis. So one of the biggest challenges you're going to have with the community garden, and one of the reasons why we're going to do these Zoom calls and we're going to do these live presentations, is because the typical person doesn't know what healthy looks like. They don't know what the environment looks like. If you go to a botanical garden, if you go to a a park, you're seeing a curated environment based on your perspective on the path. It's a lot different than a wild garden, and they're also trying to demonstrate a large number of varieties, but they have staff to go in there and make the changes and to clean things up and to tidy things up. And even then, it still doesn't look like a pristine, every bed is perfectly aligned and structured, or even, very creative. Um, Here they've got keyhole gardens on the side and, a beautiful little path. I don't expect the typical community garden to stay nice looking for a long time. I want the community garden to be productive. I want healthy soil. I want fruits and vegetables. In this picture here, these trees are actually fruit trees. Now, fruit trees can start shading a garden space, and so it'll change what you grow. But there's nothing wrong with having a community orchard. And in a lot of places around the world, there are community orchards where people come together. They share the chores of maintaining the fruit. They organize a harvest. They share the bounty, and they ultimately can celebrate and enjoy that thing they built together. So, in the case where there's city officials or there's Karens and Kins complaining about your garden, there are certain aesthetic things that need to be done. And again, the structure of the garden, the what's in the paths helps. How you manage the compost pile regularly. These things are important things to be done. Now, this leads to the fact that your community garden will need some kind of organization. So, this gardener guide is going to talk about all the things you ever wanted to know about having a garden. Oh, here's the soil food web, the neotodes, the arthropods, the birds, all this working together is what makes your garden great. Not the herbicides, not the pesticides, not the other stuff. Those are shortcuts. We don't even need fertilizer, by the way. That I do have to set the expectation that your first year garden, depending on the quality of the soil, may not be very good. But again, we're building community together. If everything was perfect right out the gate, it'd be pretty boring. It will be a challenge. And in that challenge, your community garden needs some kind of organization. And so typically, this garden is going to be based on the establishment of some kind of bylaws or guidelines. It doesn't have to be too formal. It could just be a bulletin list that says, we're not going to use any herbicides. We're not going to use any pesticides. We're going to set aside space for beneficial insects and pollinators. And then you go down to in the city of Martinsville, there is the Natural History Museum, and they actually have a pollinator garden over there. And by the way, in gardening, it's okay to knock off what people are doing. And so if you go down there and you go through the front area and you see the beautiful pollinator gardens they've got, and you just take a little notepad. Now you're not stealing anything, because if you go up there and you look at their garden and you write down a list of all the plants. In fact, there's some really nice people inside that if you go ask them questions about the bugs and the different things that are going on, they'll answer those questions. But if you just write down a list of all the plants they've got and then go find those plants and plant them in your garden, you would be mimicking the environment that they're showing as a demonstration to provide space for birds and bees and all those fancy things that are going to be a great addition to your garden. Now you might be saying, if I attract birds to my garden, are they going to eat my beans? Well, they might. So just plant some more beans for them. Don't be so selfish. If you say, hey, we don't have enough money to buy seeds, well, get some people together. In fact, very often there are seeds available at the stores for very reasonable price. But if you were going to do a pollinator garden, or you're going to do a small bird garden, you could buy one bag of bird seed and just put it out in the bed and let it grow. Uh, you could take a small number of seeds if they're true to seed, if they're non-GMO. You can take those seeds and then at the end of season collect the seeds. You could talk to somebody who already has a garden and say, "Hey, I'm interested in starting a garden, and I'd like to have some mentoring, and I'd like to work in your garden for a while, and in exchange, pay me in seed." You could work at a local nonprofit garden, use their seed, grow in their space, and then at the end, when there is a harvest, they share the bounty. Folks, again, I want to take away all the excuses. Now, when it comes to the 100 Community Gardens Challenge, what I'm asking is, if you have land, if you have an interest, if you want to work in a garden, that you raise your hand. You can do that in the comments below, and then either respond to people in the comments, or I'll get resources together to you and help with some organization in the background. I'll take care of educational resources. In fact, there are opportunities. I can introduce you to people who have plants available for sale, introduce you to organizations that maybe are giving away plants. You may not be aware, but there are places that have free trees, free seeds, and free plants. And then very often there are people who like to see community gardens who will put up money for an organization to put things together. But again, they're not going to do that unless there's someone who's willing to be a leader. So if you're on the deacons committee at a church, if you have a community garden, if you own a piece of property, if you have a civic organization that has a meeting hall, and you have land available and you want to start a community garden, I promise to you all the knowledge and information that you like, as well as when we do these videos. So I'm driving out to Richmond sometimes. I'm driving to Virginia Beach to do these videos. I would love to do that video at your location. And then I would provide some insights or some commentary like we've done on these videos to help you do that. And there's no charge because, again, I love to see community gardens. I can help in some cases with design, because there's a lot of folks around here that have great classes that will get you started. But this isn't about spending a bunch of money. This is about investing into your community. And you can see, look at that. There's grass clippings being collected. Somebody's going to go sort those out, turn them through compost, and everybody's got free compost. This is about learning about abundance rather than wishing for it or hoping for it. This is about connecting the information that's available with the opportunity, which is growing food, fresh food, helping children understand where food comes from, helping you understand where food comes from and what goes into food, which should reduce food waste. And then ultimately, getting some outdoor practice, all that vitamin D and that excitement. It's nice that a community garden might have a little picnic table for people to sit. It's nice if the community garden has maybe work days, but somebody's got to organize that stuff. A community garden will not happen in your neighborhood, in your backyard, or at your church unless somebody takes action. Now, it's not. Turns out it's not as much work as it seems. It's more of a seasonal activity. The church gardens I've seen, and actually there's one in Greensboro I want to visit. A large church. They have a beautiful garden. I think the church provided the enclosure, so there's a fenced area, and then inside the group designed the beds and put everything together. But the the point is that you could go to church in the morning, slip into some coveralls, go out there and start doing some gardening in the afternoon while the kids are playing and having a good time. Maybe you do some Bible study. Maybe you just find out how your friends have been doing. And the reward of that will make it desirable to come out on a weekend and maybe put in a couple hours and really get dirty. Or maybe you just like to sit there and watch everybody else work. Again, it's a somebody's got to organize the schedules, understand if you do group seed buys, um, kind of manage some of the conflicts that'll happen. Like there'll be conflicts because people will get competitive about their tomatoes, and they'll come in and they'll put stuff on it that's not really appropriate. A lot of times in a community garden, the best way to get nutrients in is through the composting cycles, not putting stuff directly on your garden beds, not bringing in big bags of fertilizer. Now, there are times where lime or soil amendments are appropriate. And so, what we tend to do in a community garden setting is have a discussion with maybe a monthly meeting about what's appropriate for your garden. And then everybody puts in a few dollars and you go buy the materials. But I'm telling you that between your food waste, between your grass clippings, leaves, straw, um, growing cover crops, that the nutrients are already there. We just have to make them biologically available in how we manage the soil. So again, Virginia Cooperative Extension has a gardener's handbook. It'll tell you everything you want to know about gardening. North Carolina talks about has something about how to organize a community garden. It talks about the benefits to your health, the benefits to nature itself, the life skills. Oh, I didn't even get a chance to talk about that. We'll talk about that in another program. And also how it's a cost sharing. It's a really cost sharing. But I want to leave you with the most important part. A really quality garden, whether it's in your backyard, whether it's at your civil organizations, your church, your neighborhood, on that corner lot that's been overgrown for years, um, the food is not as important as the nutrients. And we know this more now than ever before that there is a nutrient deficiency. When prices go up, people start eating more processed food. When prices go up, sometimes people don't get to eat at all. They need nutritious and healthy food. And we can do that through minimal inputs, not buying a bunch of chemicals and spraying and praying. You will have problems in your garden, but most of those problems can be solved by understanding the soil food web and understanding nutrient, because healthy plants make healthy vegetables, and then ultimately working together as a community. Because you'll discover somebody might have some bean seeds, and somebody might have some tomato seeds, and somebody might have some squash seeds, and somebody might have some cabbage seeds. And in the right seasons, it becomes a joy. It becomes a lot of friendliness and a lot of fun. It becomes something that money cannot buy. And then as you understand how to save seeds, and you go on some field trips to the Natural History Museum, or you go to field trips to some of these botanical gardens, you'll start seeing things. You'll be like, wow, that's a insect hotel, and that insect hotel is bringing pollinators to the garden, and the pollination is making our plants bigger. And it's like it just unlocks a world that you'll feel more connected. You'll reduce stress. You'll get more physical activity. And then we can make accommodations for everything else when it comes to any limitation. We can do so without a lot of effort, without a lot of expense, if you have the knowledge. So, what I'm offering as far as the 100 Community Gardens Challenge here in Martinsville, Henry County, and then, of course, people can attend virtually, is that if you know about an event that's talking about gardening, a training activity, or a place that's having a garden, or even farmers markets where people are sharing their food by selling it at the farmers market, let me know about that. You can comment on the thing here, or you can visit www.prosperityhomestead.org. And what I will do is I'll maintain an email list, and I will share this information to folks on that list. And again, I've got a lot of free resources here as well. I'll share that information to folks on the list so that we can bring people together, because that's really what it's about. So many city ordinance people, so many city council people, so many um, organizations don't understand the value of having community space that is green, community space that is sharing, community space where people cooperate. And again, a community garden is that ecosystem where people cooperate. And then when it comes to food security, I don't think having more convenience stores or more fast food restaurants or having more grocery stores is really what solves the problem if folks don't have the nutritional education that's necessary to know what foods are good to eat. And a lot of times, kids, when they grow their own vegetables, they eat their own vegetables. They may not eat it the way you prepared it, but if they know where it came from, they might start eating more raw foods. They might start eating more foods that are seasonal, and overall the health benefits are be seen very well. And so in our region, we have a lot of obesity, we have a lot of nutritional issues, we have a lot of mental health issues, we have a lot of things that community gardens can solve for. Now, I'm not asking for any money on this. I'm saying I'm going to do webinars, I'm going to do presentations, I'm going to do some tours and some highlights, kind of from a journalistic perspective, of community gardens in our area. And then, of course, when I travel, I really do enjoy visiting botanical gardens or, naturalist environments or state parks and different things. So I'll continue to highlight those. But I'll also be a coordinating factor when it comes to who's got a community garden, because I understand not everybody's going to want to start a community garden. A lot of folks just want to go and enjoy a community garden, but that's okay. Again, the model itself facilitates um, you know, a group of people working together to build something. And that's the most valuable takeaway. You're not just feeding yourself, you're not just improving available nutrients, you're working together as a community to build something. And so a lot of times there's a community garden in Compton that gang members will work side by side and grow food together, and it reduced violence, it reduced crime, it reduced a lot of these disconnects that come when people don't really understand each other, or when people don't really have interaction or exposure to each other. And so again, I'm mapping out locations that have community gardens. I'm contacting the organizers of those gardens. I'm going to promote those gardens in the general media. I do have some connections with some news folks that we're going to share those messages with, but don't wait for spring. Okay. It can take 90 to 120 days for vegetables to grow. And so we do really need to start now. I'm already buying seeds for the gardens that I'm working with here, and the gardens I'm producing myself. I'm already working with individuals about where resources are available. So sometimes it's the difference between buying a pack of seeds for $5 or buying an ounce of seed for $6. And an ounce of seed is, it could be hundreds of more seeds than the other. And then also there's a large number of folks who have small farms or homesteads around here in the Martinsville Henry County area who often sell plant starts. They sell plant starts, and so you could get started with plants from a local plant sale, or there's actually native and wild plant sales. Again, I will going to promote all these things. So again, talk with your volunteer organizations, talk with your churches, talk with your civic centers, talk with private landowners. A community garden, especially right now with war and concern about war, with economic distress, with social unrest, a community garden is a great way to reconnect with the soil, to get to know your neighbor, to grow wonderful food that can be very often very much abundant. A lot of that overgrowth that people are seeing is actually abundance. And if they knew what they were looking at, because again, there are a number of groups that are going to do educational seminars. Um, we could do this. We could grow food for our families. We can grow communities for our children. We can have educational opportunities to understand what is a natural environment. And then I can help you unlock, if you want to dig deeper in education, if you want to teach classes, if you want to connect with other professionals that are interested in this kind of thing. And again, you can be a professional at growing tomatoes, whatever you want to do. But there's also, you may not be aware, a bunch of YouTubers in the area that teach how to can vegetables, how to preserve food, how to grow gardens, how to manage larger properties, or how to manage community gardens. And we'd like to help you do these things. So again, I'm Justin Hitt. This is my picture down here, and I'm about to go out there and work in my to work on my property a little bit. But um, if you've got a small farm or homestead and you're creating plants, I'd like to connect you with people creating gardens. If you've got a church, a civic center, or anything like that that you want to set up a garden, I'd be happy to talk with you individually. But more likely, we're just going to do a recorded interview. And if you want to sign up for more information, I want you to go to www.prosperityhomestead.org. Go to the contact tab here, and then just provide your contact information and put a little message in here and say community garden. You don't even have to spell it right. Look at that, community garden. Because again, you don't have to have a lot of money to start a garden. You don't have to have any special skills. You don't have to do anything to get started. Now, my hope is that we can get you skilled up quickly so that you can help other people, and then all together we start having more of that community connection, more of that wonderful seasonal food, more of that culture that comes with food, especially at a time where so many people are challenged with food, and especially at a time where so many people don't know where their food came from. I'm Justin Hitt with Prosperity Homestead, and this has been about our 100 Garden Challenge. I would love to have a list of 100 gardens, as well as their criteria for joining the garden, because community garden can be a private garden. And then if you're looking to garden and you don't have a place, we'll find you a place. If you've got a place and you're looking for gardeners, we'll do that matchmaking. Ask questions in the comments below. Hopefully this all recorded so I can promote it and help more people get their community gardens going. And I will answer the questions with the podcast episodes from Prosperity Homestead. Thanks for watching.